Are you ready to embark on a journey with a novel? Now, we have been covering short stories and then the one act plays for the drama section. So the literary works have been shorter in nature and you've been able to read them in one sitting. However, the novel, we're going to break it up over several days, maybe up to close to 6 weeks of activities, and it'll be a little bit at a time. On the days that you're reading, you will definitely have several chapters that you need to read, which will be pretty much the only activity you have for that day. But I would like to go over with you the concepts that we're going to be studying. So the literary elements that we're going to be talking about in this novel is protagonist and antagonist, setting, external conflict, irony, mood, symbolism, and theme. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into symbolism and theme in this unit. And then, of course, you'll be doing some vocabulary activities. I did move the vocabulary activities to the day after that you read instead of before you read. And I like to do that. I like to mix that up because I think it's beneficial and helpful for you to identify those words as you're reading as unknown and then come back later and get the definition and refresh your memory. And then the reading focus activities with this unit, I will not be teaching them. I would like for you to read the information that's presented in those sections and then complete those activities as you read. Most of those are pretty self-explanatory, and we've covered a lot of them already in the other units, but I think it's redundant to continue to cover them at this level. I would rather focus on the literary elements, which is what this curriculum is all about, is focusing on the literature. So let's quickly run through the unit so that you know what we're going to be doing. So we'll begin with just some opening activities and then some information about the author, and then a little bit of access the backdrop. So not much reading the first couple of days. We'll ease into the novel unit. And then beginning on day 3, you'll see that you have section 1 that you'll be reading and completing a reading focus activity as you read. I do want you to notice that on the first day of each section, there's a section icon. It's a little eyeball, and that is something that we want you to keep an eye out for as you read. We're wanting you to think about the questions that will be in that section. So be sure that you're reading it and that you're thinking about that as you read. You'll also notice at the top of day 3 that on the right-hand side, every time we enter a new section, I will be telling you what the literary focus is and what the reading focus is. The literary focus is in bold, and then the reading focus is in just standard font. Flipping over to day 4, in these first few sections, we'll actually have an activity on the literary page, and then the next page we do another literary activity. As we move through the unit, though, we'll be moving to just a little bit of information about one literary element and then focusing on the activity on the next page. You'll see that as we go along. So you'll have day 4, day 5 on separate days, literary analysis and dive deeper questions with some vocab. And then on day 6, I will not be teaching. You'll be completing your comprehension questions, your think critically, and another various type of activity that's listed on that last page. Once you get to day 7, you'll see you're at a new section. We tell you which pages to read. Keep an eye out for things. You'll have a reading focus page that you'll pull from the resource book. And then day 8 and day 9 are separate literary analysis activities. And each one of those, they're always listed on the activity where you find it in the resource book. And dive deeper questions and vocab on those individual days. Looking at section 3 on day 11, nothing has changed, but you'll notice that when you flip to day 12 and day 13, day 12 does not have an activity. It's more informative information that I will teach about the irony just as a refresher. It'll be a short video and you'll complete your vocab activity. When you come back the next day, I'll be talking about that same literary element again in a video, and you'll complete the activity along with your dive deeper questions. And then that just it continues that method throughout the rest of the unit, all the way through section 6, which is the last section. And then at the very end, you'll complete the summative assessment. And then I'll be talking to you about the culminating activity a little bit later on. So with that, I think we're ready for you to get started with your day 1 activity, where you read a little bit of information that we've put in the textbook and some information about the author. But before you begin, I would like to talk a little bit about the novel. The novel is To Kill a Mockingbird. And this is definitely one of the most popular books in American literature that has ever been written. Harper Lee did an amazing job, and I think that you're going to find that this book is a very interesting book. It deals with a lot of real life issues at the same time. That's why we're going to be exploring theme at the end of the unit, because it's definitely a book that encounters a lot of situations with society during a specific time period in the history of the United States, and other cultures as well has experienced this. But To Kill a Mockingbird has won many awards. I would encourage you to take a little bit of time, since there's not much to read on day one and day two, to just spend a little time researching that book. It's okay if you read a summary. It's okay if you read about the characters. That's not going to, in fact, that probably will help you to learn more. The more that you know before you begin reading, the better. So feel free to research anything about Harper Lee, the author, and the book To Kill a Mockingbird. So with that, I'll turn you loose this time to get started on your very first day's activities. All right, so now that you have read your very first section and you're ready to look at some literary analysis, let's talk about characters. Now, we're going to focus on protagonist and antagonist, and I'm going to get to that. But I want you to also be thinking about some other elements of characters. So we know that there are major characters and there are minor characters. So as you read, you're going to begin to think, okay, who are the major characters in this story? The plot is revolving around who, and then who is supplemental to that who is just interacting with the major characters along the way. Now, also remember that characters can have traits, which are those permanent qualities. The permanent qualities are the way the characters act. It's found, you can identify it through the things they say, the actions that they take, how they interact with other characters, but it's those permanent qualities that characters are showing us as we learn more and more about them. So, for example, an angry person could be a trait, a very shy person, a happy person, joyful. Those are all permanent qualities. And then the other one is motives, and that is the reasons characters act the way they do. So as you read, again, you're going to be thinking, why are the characters acting the way they are? What is motivating them to do that? And then let's talk a little bit about, I'm just going to mention two. So we have dynamic and static characters. Remember that dynamic and static characters are very different. Dynamic means there is change. So you're going to start paying attention to the main characters in the story and saying, hey, are they changing? Are their ideas changing? Are they thinking differently about certain topics? Are they having any sort of change at all that's evident to you as you read? And then static characters are those that do not change. No change. They just stay the same. And so let's go ahead and talk about the main focus, though, is protagonist and antagonist. So the protagonist is the main character, who is usually the hero or the heroine, and is a key tool used in the development of the story. So the story revolves around the protagonist as it progresses. And then a good protagonist often experiences some sort of growth or development as the conflict builds through the story, and that protagonist becomes a dynamic character. The antagonist is in direct opposition to the protagonist. So, most of the time they are the ones who struggle against or are called the villain, and etc. But they help create the conflict in the story. So as you're reading the novel, you're going to be thinking about who is the protagonist, who is antagonist. And keep in mind, there can be more than one of each. So, with that in mind, you do have an activity today to complete from the resource book with protagonist and antagonist. And then don't forget to complete your vocab activity. And when we come back tomorrow, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into setting. All right, let's talk about setting. Now, setting is just simply the time and place that a story takes place. Now, when you are in elementary, basically you just go about identifying time and place to discuss the setting. And I will definitely have you do that with this activity as well. But I want you to think about, does the time and place affect the conflict? So in this story, you are reading already about the events that are taking place. You've read section 1, and you're getting a good feel for the time and place the story takes place, and if perhaps does that have an effect on the conflict. So I want you to think about, as you're reading, as you have uh, as you remember what you've read, and then when you're reading the next sections, that conflict is definitely going to be a part of the time period with this book. Not necessarily the place. It could be, there could be some connections there, but I specifically want you to be thinking about how that's affecting the place. I'm sorry, the time is affecting the conflict. And then also think about how the setting is affecting the mood. So, what is the feeling that you're getting as you read, and is the setting having an effect on that? So, you'll have an activity to complete for setting today. But let's move on down. I want to talk to you about question number 2 in the dive deeper section before you get started. I've made a few notes here to be sure and not miss anything. So, let's read it together. The question is a comprehend question. It says, Atticus gives Scout advice that effectively shapes her growth for the rest of the story. So think about Scout growing through the rest of the story. Perhaps could she be a dynamic character? We do not know yet, but we will know by the end of the novel whether or not she's a dynamic character. Does she change and grow? So he tells her, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You'll never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. At first, Scout does not understand what Atticus means. Rephrase Atticus's advice in a way that someone Scout's age could easily understand, then explain what Atticus meant. So, think about how the age group that Scout is in, and how might that be rephrased? How might that statement be rephrased to make more of an impact on a child that age? And then explain what Atticus means by that. So, as you're considering this, I want you to think about Scout, this information. How is this going to affect her growth? You're not sure yet. You have a simple assignment here, but I do want you to be thinking about that as we continue on in the novel. Is how is this affecting Scout? Because it's going to play a very, very vital role as you read through that. So, last of all, we're going to look at the foreshadowing at the bottom. Now, early on in a story, you probably realize that foreshadowing is simply a possibility. You don't know that an event has been foreshadowed until you get to the end of the novel, but at this point, we could say, hey, is this event foreshadowing something else that's going to be happening? So, I have given you a situation that happened in this section, and I want you to think, could this be foreshadowing a future event? And if so, what is it? Again, this is more of a prediction at this point, and we'll find out if something was being foreshadowed here or not later. But right now, I just want you to start thinking about that and discuss that answer with a student or your teacher. So complete day 5 activities, and then we'll move on. Now that you've had a chance to read section 2, you're diving deeper and deeper into the storyline, and you're beginning to learn a lot more about Scout and Atticus and all the other characters that are involved in this story. And, this is a fantastic novel. It's a fantastic book. I think that as we talk about conflict now, we're going to begin to move deeper and more into how this is playing out in the story. So let's do a quick review for external conflict. We're not going to talk about internal conflict right now. We're going to talk about external conflict. So remember, person versus person is one type of conflict. And that's just where two characters are in opposition to one another. And then we have person versus society. And that's where one person is in conflict with ideas of society, people in society. And then we have person versus nature, which is any sort of conflict in that has to do with some element of nature. Now, keep in mind that these types of conflict are going to be used to build the story. So all of this rising action, the author can use any or all of these to continue to build them throughout the story, pushing it towards the climax. So we're going to have you identify some of those today in your activities, where you have to read an excerpt and say, hey, this is person versus whatever, and then explain why it is that category. So if I give you this event right here, and I say, which one of these types of external conflict is this event, then you have to say, oh, it's this one, and then you have to explain why that event is representative of person versus person. But on a deeper level, that doesn't really have anything to do with today's activity, I want you to begin to think about this conflict. How is this type of conflict becoming more and more evident as you read person versus society? Now, this could be the protagonist. It could be a dynamic character. It could be a static character. There's a lot of different ways to think about this. And so I really want you to begin to think as you're moving through the story, through the novel, within each section, how is this type of external conflict very obvious and very evident? So be sure to complete today's activity in the resource book and your vocab activity, and then we'll come back in the next lesson and talk more about conflict and symbolism. Today's activity has to do with you finding and identifying types of person versus person conflict in the section that you just read. Think about characters in the story who are in opposition or conflict with other characters in the story. That's what you're going to be looking for today. So I want to just give you an example of one that you can even use on your activity sheet if you'd like. So if you think about when Scout and her cousin has a conflict, they get into a fight, Francis, that would be considered person versus person. And the explanation is we have one character in opposition with another character, and there is conflict. And so that would be an example of person versus person conflict, obviously that external kind. So you definitely have an activity that you want to complete and some dive deeper questions, but let's jump down and talk about symbolism. So you remember that when we've talked about symbolism so far, we've mentioned about it being an object or a person, something that is given deeper meaning or a hidden meaning. And this represents something else. And so I want you to think about so far, what symbol do you believe is present in the second section of To Kill a Mockingbird, and what might it represent? So let's think a little bit about a specific situation that came up in the story where there were some air rifles and a mockingbird that was mentioned. between those two things, could one of them symbolize something? So you may recall exactly what was happening in that scenario. So if I was to prove, I would have to say, what are the ways that I can find a symbol? Well, is there possibly a deeper meaning? You might remember when we learned about symbolism in some earlier levels. Sometimes we can look to the title and say, is there obvious symbolism in the title? Well, the word mockingbird is in the title, so that could be pointing to a symbol. So I want you to think about that. I don't want you to get too bogged down with it and be like, oh, I've got to find the symbol. Think about, what have you read so far that might be a symbol of something else? Sometimes it doesn't seem relevant to the story, but if you think about it, it could have a deeper or underlying meaning. So, with that in mind, that's how you want to proceed in thinking about, is there something in this section that I believe could be a symbol? So, go ahead and get started with those activities, and then we'll come back for more. All right, the conflict is building in this story, and you can tell that we're full-fledged into the rising action, where conflict is just, it's getting worse and worse, and we are beginning to see where this story is headed. Although no, we don't know for sure yet, we have an idea of where the story is headed because the conflict continues to build. And yesterday, or in the last lesson, you read a little bit more about situational irony and completed your vocab activity after reading the chapters for section 3. So I want to cover that with you before you do the activity today for situational irony. So let's do a quick review from what you read yesterday. Remember that situational irony is, you are reading about a situation and you expect a specific outcome, but the actual outcome is different. So, an example I gave you in the last lesson was the Wizard of Oz. So, all these characters on a journey to find this amazing ancient wizard, and come to find out it was just someone behind a sheet, I believe, or hiding behind a man hiding behind a curtain. So that's situational irony. So as you're exploring situational irony, let's look at the information that I've given you in the textbook. You do have an activity sheet to complete from the resource book, and I've given you an excerpt below here on the page. So let's read this excerpt together. The children sneak out and find Atticus sitting alone in front of the Maycomb jail. Soon, a large group of men arrive in cars and approach Atticus, staying out of the light. They demand for Atticus to turn Tom Robinson over and inform him that they sent the sheriff out into the woods on a misinformed chase. So, this is situational irony, and what is the outcome that we expected when we read this part? And then, what actually happened? So, that's situational irony, and that's what I want you to complete for today's activity. And does it qualify for situational irony? And then explain how you know that it does or does not qualify. So let's talk a little bit more about symbolism as well. So we have read another section. Is there anything in this section that you feel like is representing a symbol? Are the guns or the mockingbird brought up again? If so, then maybe we want to notate that here in our discussion. If not, maybe there was something new that came up. That's what I want you to be thinking about. So go ahead and complete today's situational irony activity and answer your dive deeper questions. And don't forget about symbolism. Wow, we are in the heat of the story at this point, and we are recognizing that conflict is really coming to a head. And hopefully, at this point, you're getting a sense for how you think the story may turn out. And because of that, we want to talk about mood. You did read a little bit about that yesterday before you completed your vocab activity, but let's complete an activity for mood. We want to remember that mood is the most prevailing emotion that you sense or feel as you read. Now, authors can hint to that by using certain words. So if you look at the example on the previous page, you'll see that I included just above the diagram there, the crowd cheered as the returning soldiers paraded through the streets. So there are some key words that are communicating to me the mood. I would say that cheered is definitely one of those words. Paraded is another word. Sergeant Smith ran to the march to embrace his wife. So embrace. And even ran, I think, would be a word that I would think helps to convey the mood. Embrace his wife as tears of joy streamed down his face. So I would say by reading this that the mood is being identified by these key words and the surroundings or the environment. I'm really getting a sense for how this is making me feel. What is the mood? I feel joyful. I feel happy. That would be the mood. So you're going to think about what is the mood during the trial. And you need to provide us with those keywords and evidence from that excerpt from the trial that proves what you believe the mood of that particular section is. So, what is the emotion you're feeling as you read that section, as you so far through the book, and then you get to that section? What is the mood of that trial? What are you feeling? And then, what keywords, phrases, evidence from the text is making you feel that way? So complete today's mood activity, and then don't forget, dive deeper and another question about symbolism. We are almost finished with the book, and we are going to talk about symbolism. You did read a bit about that yesterday. I just wanted to put a little refresher in your mind before you completed your vocab. But let's dive into that today. I want to read with you from chapter 25. We're going to go to the very end. So if you want to pause the video and find the place with me, or you can just listen as I read. We're going to talk about the symbolism that's used in Mr. Underwood's editorial. But let's refresh our memory a little bit first. A symbol is an object or action to which a deeper or hidden meaning is attached. And so we've been talking about that with each section a little bit as we move along, wondering, could it be this, could it be that, maybe this, maybe that. And so now it's time for us to really make a decision on some of that. So let's read together from the book. I'm going to start with the paragraph that says a few more details. A few more details enabling the listener to repeat his version in turn, then nothing to talk about until the Macomb Tribune appeared the following Thursday. There was a brief obituary in the colored news, and there was also an editorial. Mr. B.B. Underwood was at his most bitter, and he couldn't have cared less who canceled advertising and subscriptions. But Macomb didn't play that way. Mr. Underwood could holler till he sweated and write whatever he wanted to. He'd still get his advertising and subscriptions. If he wanted to make a fool of himself in his paper, that was his business. Mr. Underwood didn't talk about miscarriages of justice. He was writing so children could understand. Mr. Underwood simply figured it was a sin to kill cripples, be they standing, sitting, or escaping. He likened Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children, and Macomb thought he was trying to write an editorial poetically enough to be reprinted in the Montgomery Advertiser. How could this be so, I wondered, as I read Mr. Underwood's editorial. Senseless killing. Tom had been given due process of law to the day of his death. He had been tried openly and convicted by 12 good men and true. My father had fought for him all the way. Then Mr. Underwood's meaning became clear. Atticus had used every tool available to free men to save Tom Robinson. But in the secret courts of men's hearts, Atticus had no case. Tom was a dead man the minute Mayella Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. The name Ewell gave me a queasy feeling. Macomb had lost no time in getting Mr. Ewell's views on Tom's demise and passing them along through that English channel of gossip, Miss Stephanie Crawford. Miss Stephanie told Aunt Alexandra in Jim's presence, "Oh, Foot, he's old enough to listen," that Mr. Ewell said it made one down and about 2 more to go. Jim told me not to be afraid. Mr. Ewell was more hot gas than anything. Jim also told me that if I breathed a word to Atticus, If in any way I let Atticus know I knew, Jim would personally never speak to me again. So let's think about the editorial gave information that could definitely point for us to a symbol. What is symbolic in that statement? I don't want to tell you, I want you to think about it. So the activity says what in the editorial has symbolic significance? What does the symbolism mean? And then what did Atticus say was similar to Mr. Underwood's editorial? So complete this symbolism activity, thinking deeply about everything you know from the story so far, and then bam, there it is right in the editorial. And with that, you can get started, and then you're going to come back and do the dive deeper questions. So you finished the book. You're all finished. You know the outcome. Did this story end the way you wanted it to end? Do you remember when I said to you earlier in the story, I want you to think about person versus society? Who was in conflict with the ideas of society? Do you remember when I talked about a person in the story who might be a dynamic character because there was change involved? Do you remember that? Do you remember when I had you read something that Atticus told Scout about walking in someone else's shoes and seeing life from their experience? Do you believe that made Scout consider a lot of things throughout the story and change as a person? There's a lot to think about. I mean, this story is unbelievable. But unfortunately, that's not the discussion for today's activity. I want to talk to you about theme. Theme is the overall message about life that it's like basically the underlying meaning about, but it's a message about life that we can walk away with and say, here's what the message is from this story, from this book. And so, with theme being a meaning or idea of a literary work that's hidden, it's underneath, we also want to consider that theme is intentionally repeated throughout a work using action, dialogue, and symbolism. So we've been talking about symbolism. We identified that in the last lesson you did. That is going to affect the theme. The symbol will have an impact on the theme with this story. Remember that we can identify theme by looking at the title of the story, characters' thoughts, actions, and speech, how a story's conflict is resolved, and lessons a character learns. I would say in this particular one, we can probably gain theme from all of those. What is that message? What is that underlying hidden meaning or idea of this literary work? Let's read together the second paragraph here on day 25. A theme can sometimes be obvious while other times it is subtle and must be closely examined to fully understand. Symbols are sometimes intertwined with theme and are used to help communicate it. The tools below can help you discern a story's theme if it is not obvious. Close reading. Can you look more deeply into what is being read? Are there underlying meanings? Repetition. Is there a particular idea that is continually repeated throughout the work? The good and bad. What in the story is portrayed as good and what is portrayed as bad? I want you to take into consideration those things. And I want to tell you what I believe the theme is, but you can read my answers in the answer key after you're finished. But I want you to think about this deeply, ponder this entire book, and what would you say is the one sentence that sums up the theme for this book? Then be sure to give us clues from the text that support that theme. You may have to scan through the pages again. You may have to ponder and think deeply. Or three examples from the text could come to your mind immediately, and you can support that theme with that clue from the text that point to your answer. And then I want just to go over one thing with Dive Deeper. Synthesize is a different kind of activity many times when we get to the end, we want you to do something. We don't want you to just comprehend and say, who is the character that did this, and you write it down. By the end, we're wanting you to synthesize. We want you to experience it. And so you're going to become characters. You're going to do things that are part of the story. And so keep that in mind as you complete those activities. And then when you come back, you're going to be having a summative assessment for the novel, and then I'll be talking to you about the culminating activity in the next few pages. Now that you've completed the summative assessment, you're ready to begin the novel. And I want us to flip to the third step. Actually, it's a strange place to begin. Let's skip to the third step. The final outcome of this first part. This first part is very easy. The final outcome is that you will choose one of the three methods to present the symbolism you create. And I'll go back over that I'll go over that in just a moment. So you're either going to write an essay, a 5-paragraph essay to communicate the symbol, or you're going to create a board or a model, some sort of visual presentation to communicate the symbol, or you can write a speech and give the speech to communicate the symbolism. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that before we begin. So let's jump back to step one. Basically, we're going to create a symbol that represents the theme, it is wrong to kill an innocent thing or person. So if you think about the underlying message from the To Kill a Mockingbird, is it is wrong to kill an innocent thing or person. If that is the theme, well, Harper Lee used the symbol of the mockingbird. Is a sin to kill a mockingbird. The innocence of the mockingbird is a symbol of the innocence of life. And so if you think about that particular symbol, the mockingbird, and putting that into sentence form, it is a sin to kill a mockingbird, that symbol represents or promotes that theme that it is wrong to kill an innocent person, thing or person. So the first step you're going to do is create a symbol. Okay? I recommend that you create one that represents innocence, just because it'll be easier. Okay? But you can choose something else if you want to do something else. But the goal is to choose a symbol, a person, an object, or an action that is representative of the theme, it is wrong to kill an innocent thing or person. It does not have to be from the novel. If you find something in the novel that you think works, you can support it, then use it. But I just want you to think about any object, person, or action that you believe could be used as a symbol to represent the theme, it is wrong to kill a thing or person. Then you're going to, at the bottom of step one, you're going to write, what does the symbol represent? I've put innocence there. That's already done if you choose to do innocence. If not, then you have to tell me what you're going to that the symbol is going to represent. Then you're going to obviously read through the examples I've given to you. Then step two is create one sentence and include the symbol that describes the theme using symbolism. So the theme is, it is wrong to kill an innocent person or thing. If you had chosen a mockingbird, you would say it is a sin to kill a mockingbird, and this mockingbird would be the symbol. Well, you have to choose something. This is thinking deeper than what you're normally used to, but you have to choose something that represents that theme. And then you will present it using one of the three methods listed there in the final step. So with that, go ahead and get started with your culminating activity, which can last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. You have that much time to get it completed.